Chickadees, welcome to a new video. One evening, while scrolling through Pinterest, I came across a waistcoat fronted jacket pattern. I didn't think much at the time, but then I couldn't seem to shake it from my thoughts. Alas, I could not find it again, so I headed to the Internet Archive to look at old pattern cutting books. I had nearly given up when I discovered there are two versions of the Keystone Guide to Pattern Cutting, one from 1895, which people know from Bernadette Sherlock videos, and one from 1891. I flipped through the latter, and there on my screen was the exact pattern I was looking for. So this is my base kind of body. This here was my first draft, and it did the same thing that the truly Victorian patterns does, in that it ends up with like all this extra fabric here, and I never understood why, and I think it's just this way of patterning that happens. So the front has gone all the way right up here instead, just to get rid of all that extra stuff. So I'll probably just keep that as, you know, just in case something goes wrong and I lose this pattern. But this is the amended pattern, and I've also lengthened it. In the instructions, it basically tells you to do the front darts and the back panel, and then whatever is left from half your waist measurement to put it in the sides, but that would have only given me a tiny curve. So I've just like doubled the amount on each side so that it will be a bit more curvy, and also that takes into account if I'm wearing particularly, you know, floofy skirts or my bum pad or something like that, so it should fit over. So this is the base, and I will copy this onto another sheet of paper and then actually add in the bits for the waistcoat front. So I've got to put in the waistcoat front bit here and then draw in a shawl collar. I will link this down below so you can have a proper look at it. I'm keeping mine quite long around the hip area, whereas this one they, you know, cut it quite high, and I'm also going to add a vent in like they do on this one. So this is the pattern all done and cut out. You can see the waistcoat front here, and I did put the vent on it just here, and this is my shawl collar. When you are doing a flat pattern draft like this, it doesn't matter if it's vintage or modern, when you do your mock-up, obviously you check for the general things like, does it fit? Is there any excess anywhere that you need to take in with darts, anything like that? But one of the major things you need to look at is the neck and where the shoulder seams meet, because when it's patterned flat, you can't always pattern for the curve around your neck or the curve around your arm. So a lot of times when you actually put the shoulder seams together, it'll look very pointed like this, and you'll have to add in more so you don't get a weird kind of just empty space. And the same with the arm side, where that meets at the shoulder, you can end up with like a pointed empty space. So as well as checking for, you know, fit and everything, remember to check the smoothness and the lines over your shoulder and around your neck. But now that everything is done, I need to cut out my fabric and get started. I will link some videos and a useful blog post on the actual drafting process, but I don't think I could really do it justice and wouldn't want to dedicate a whole video to trying. And so we get to cutting. I am using the purple fabric I used for my cycling bloomers. I also cut out a lining in white cotton lawn and the interlining in beige cotton and medium weight iron-on interfacing. I marked the darts on the front panels with chalk. For the interlining layer, I cut the darts on one side and then zigzagged them closed. For the fashion layer, I made the darts in the usual way and then cut them open down the centre, pressing the extra fabric flat. Then I finally learned how to baste layers together with a large pad stitch. I was surprised by how little time it took me to baste all the pieces together. It was barely an afternoon. Once that was done, it was time for the monotonous task of stitching the pieces together. They were then pressed, snipped, turned and pressed again. So this is where we are so far. So the next thing I need to do is to attach the collar piece. It just gets, well, I'm assuming it will just get stitched on kind of there and overhang a tiny bit. There's no instructions in the Keystone guide how to actually sew on, which is not useful. It just says put the collar on. So I have done a tiny bit of research in other sewing books and I can't find specific instructions. So I've turned the seam allowance under and I'm just going to kind of stitch it in place. And yeah, I have tried it on and I feel like this top bit is a tiny bit too high. So I might cut a smidge off there, but yes, that's where we are so far. It's looking really nice, and it's fitting nicely. It just feels that front bit is a bit too high. I pinned the collar into place and tried it on again and decided to cut the front down a bit. Once I had altered, restitched, snipped, turned and pressed the front section, I pinned the collar back into place and basted the very front edge into place, catching only a few threads of the collar piece. To stitch it on, I flipped the facing out the way and then flipped the collar piece to the front and stitched it down with a running back stitch along the basted seam line. I think this is a good place to leave part 1. In part 2, I will attach the lining, the sleeves and do the finishing touches, and we will attempt to answer the question, is there such a thing as too much purple? If you enjoyed this video, why not donate to my Ko-fi to support my creative projects? The link for that and anything I have mentioned in the video can be found in the description. Whilst you're there, why not like, comment and subscribe, and remember to be kind to yourself and compassionate to others, and I will see you all in the next video.